The shuttle was small and gray and completely unremarkable. It drifted through the shimmering docking field of the orbital palace above Valun Prime and settled onto the landing pad with a soft hiss of pressure locks. Around it, the other ships in the bay were beautiful, long and curved, covered in gold leaf and crystal inlays, each one a floating work of art, built to carry the noble families of the Valun Empire. The Terran shuttle looked like a stone dropped into a jewelry box. The dock officers barely glanced at it. One of them made a note on his datapad. Another whispered something to his companion that made them both smile. They had been told a human was coming. They had not been told to care. Cole Harris stepped off the ramp and into the cold, perfumed air of the palace docks. He was average height by human standards, which meant he was short by Valun ones. His dark hair was cut close. His jaw carried an old scar that ran from his ear to his chin, faded white against tanned skin. He wore the dress uniform of the Terran Confederation Navy, dark blue, clean, pressed, and completely without decoration except for a single silver pin on his collar. On his belt, he carried a blade in a worn leather sheath. He looked up at the soaring crystal ceiling above the dock, took a slow breath, and walked forward. High above the docking level, on a gallery wrapped in pale silk curtains, Princess Lyriel of House Serathai watched the human arrive. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, her face still. She was tall and sharp-featured, with silver-white hair that fell past her shoulders, and eyes the color of deep water. She wore a gown of layered blue and gray that moved like smoke when she breathed. She was beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful, distant and cold, and not particularly interested in being admired. She watched the human cross the dock floor alone, carrying a single bag over one shoulder, and felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger exactly, something closer to grief. This was the man she was to be bonded to. This small, scarred, plain creature from a species that lived barely a century. This was the price of her people's survival. The Terran Confederation controlled the galactic shipping lanes that kept Valun's economy alive. Without the alliance, the Droshek Dominion would swallow her father's empire within a generation. Everyone knew this, and everyone knew that the bonding, the marriage as the humans called it, was the seal on the treaty. A chain dressed up as a gift. Lyriel turned from the gallery and walked away without a word. That evening the court gathered in the great hall of the orbital palace for a formal reception. The hall was enormous, lit by floating orbs of pale gold light that drifted near the vaulted ceiling. The walls were lined with living vines that bloomed in slow rhythmic pulses of color. Hundreds of Valun nobles filled the space, dressed in silks and crystal armor, and cloaks woven with threads of light. They moved like dancers, even when they were standing still. Their voices were soft and musical, and their laughter rang like glass. Cole walked in through the main doors, and every conversation in the room dropped by half. He bowed. It was a correct bow. Someone had clearly taught him the form. But it lacked the flowing, multi-layered gesture that Valun etiquette demanded. It was like watching someone play a single note on an instrument built for symphonies. A few nobles near the door openly sneered. Others simply looked away, as if he were a stain on the floor that someone would eventually clean. Lord Ketherun was the first to speak to him directly. Ketherun was tall even by Valun standards, broad in the shoulders, with a sharp face and golden eyes that never seemed to blink. He had been the leading candidate for Lyriel's bonding before the Terran alliance changed everything, and he carried that loss like a knife hidden under his robes. He approached Cole with a wide, sharp smile and looked down at him, the way one might look at a small animal that had wandered into a formal gathering. "So, this is the Terran Groom," Ketherun said, loud enough for the nearest 50 nobles to hear. "I expected something more." Cole looked up at him. "I get that a lot," he said. Catherine's smile widened. "Tell me, human, is it true your kind lives only 80 or 90 of your little years? How wonderfully brief. Like candles. Short burning candles that smell of iron and dirt." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Cole stood there and let it pass over him like wind. His face did not change. He did not clench his fists or raise his voice. He simply waited until the laughter faded. And then he looked past Ketharon to the far end of the hall, where Lyriel stood watching from beside her father's throne. He met her eyes and gave her a single, respectful nod. Lyriel did not nod back, but she noticed that the human's eyes were steady and calm and completely unbroken, and she filed that observation away in a quiet corner of her mind. Later that night, Lyriel's handmaiden came to her chambers. Her name was Syra, a lesser noble from a minor house, quick and observant and deeply loyal. She helped Lyriel remove her formal gown and brush out her hair, and while she worked, she talked. "The human carries a blade," Syra said, "an actual metal blade, on his belt, at all times." Lyriel frowned. "A weapon? In the palace?" The guards did not stop him. Apparently the Terran diplomatic agreement permits personal sidearms, but it is not a gun or a plasma tool. It is a sword, a short one, made of steel, hand-forged, they say. The metal workers in the lower levels are calling it a relic. "Barbaric," Lyriel said quietly. "The court thinks so," Syra agreed. She paused, then added, "He did not flinch, you know, when Ketharin mocked him. He did not flinch at all." Lyriel said nothing. She stared at her own reflection in the mirror and thought about candles, about how short-burning things could still leave marks. 3 levels below the royal chambers, in a narrow room in the servants' wing, where the air smelled of recycled atmosphere and old metal, Cole Harris sat on the edge of a thin bed and drew his blade from its sheath. The steel caught the dim light and held it. He ran a soft cloth along the edge with slow, careful strokes, the way his grandfather had taught him when he was a boy on the frontier. The hilt was wrapped in dark leather, worn smooth by generations of hands. On the crossguard, a small engraving caught the light if you held it at just the right angle. 5 words stamped into old steel: "For those who stand when others kneel." Cole cleaned the blade until it shone, slid it back into its sheath, and turned off the light. He had a long road ahead of him. He had known that before he came. The laughter and the looks and the whispered insults were not a surprise. They were the cost of the promise he had made. He closed his eyes in the dark and slept the way soldiers sleep, quickly, quietly, and ready to wake. The days that followed were designed to break him. Cole understood that. He had spent enough time in hostile territory to recognize the shape of a campaign, even when it was dressed in silk and served with wine. It started with the small things. His quarters were in the servants' wing, 3 levels below, where even minor visiting dignitaries were housed. The room was narrow, the bed was hard, and the climate system was set 2 degrees too cold for human comfort. His meals were delivered late or not at all. When he walked through the palace corridors, servants stepped aside, not out of respect, but out of a desire to avoid being seen near him. He was a stain they did not want on their clothes. Cole said nothing about any of it. He worked early each morning, washed with cold water, dressed in his uniform, and walked through the palace with the same steady, unhurried pace. He greeted every servant and guard he passed. A few, after several days, began to nod back. The formal dinner on the 4th evening was where Ketharon made his next move. The great dining hall was a long, curved room with a table that could seat 300. The seating was arranged by rank and political importance, and by ancient custom, the groom-to-be should have been placed at Lyriel's right hand. Instead, Cole found his name card at the far end of the table, separated from Lyriel by more than 20 nobles. The chair was slightly shorter than the others. The plate in front of him held a dish called vethal, a gray, tasteless root mash that was traditionally fed to laborers and servants. Everyone else at the table had been served the elaborate 7-course feast that Valand High Dining was famous for. The message was clear. You are not one of us. You are beneath us. Know your place. Cole picked up his fork, tasted the vethal, and nodded thoughtfully. Then he turned to the nearest servant and said, "This is good. Could I get the recipe? I think my mother would like it." The servant stared at him, uncertain. A few nobles nearby exchanged glances. They had expected anger or shame, or at least the tight-lipped silence of a man trying not to show his hurt. They had not expected a man who genuinely did not seem to care about the insult. It was unsettling, like throwing a stone into water and watching it float. Ketharon, seated near the center of the table beside Lyriel, watched the exchange with narrowed golden eyes. He leaned toward the noble beside him and murmured something. The noble laughed. Lyriel, who had seen the seating arrangement and understood exactly what it meant, kept her eyes on her plate and said nothing. The next day, a group of young noble sons intercepted Cole in a corridor near the palace gardens. There were 5 of them, tall and sharp-featured, and dressed in the jeweled half-cloaks that marked them as heirs to powerful houses. Their leader was a lord named Halrin, a cousin of Ketharon's with the same golden eyes and the same thin smile. "Human," Halrin said, blocking the corridor, "we hear your kind considers itself clever. We would like to test this." They brought him to a side chamber and set up a game of Valith, a strategy game played on a hexagonal board with hundreds of pieces, each with different movement rules and conditional abilities. It was famously complex. Valand children began learning it at age 5, and most did not master it until they were 30. The game was not a game. It was a trap. They expected Cole to be lost within the first few moves, and they expected to laugh about it for weeks. Cole sat down and studied the board. He asked them to explain the rules, which they did with exaggerated patience, the way one might explain colors to a blind man. Then they played. Cole lost. He lost decisively, in fact, in just under 40 moves. But something happened during those 40 moves that none of the young lords had expected. Cole adapted. He made mistakes in the early game, but by the middle game, he had stopped making the same mistakes twice. His moves became sharper. His traps became more layered. By the end, he was not winning, but he was making them work for their victory in ways that made one of them, a younger lord named Dorath, quieter than the others, sit back in his chair and look at the human with something that was not quite respect, but was no longer contempt. "Again?" Cole asked when the game ended. They played again. Cole lost again, but by a smaller margin. Halrin stopped smiling. They did not invite him to play a third time. Each day, by ancient custom, Lyriel was required to spend 1 supervised hour with her intended groom. These meetings took place in a small garden chamber overlooking the planet below, with Syra and 2 palace guards present. The conversations were stiff and formal. Lyriel sat with her back straight and her hands folded, answering Cole's questions in short, precise sentences. She treated the hour like a duty, something to be endured and then forgotten. But Cole did not ask the questions she expected. He did not ask about her family's wealth, or the terms of the treaty, or the political structure of the Vaelun court. He asked her what the planet below looked like at sunrise. He asked her if the forests on the northern continent were as beautiful as the files said. He asked her what she liked to read, and whether the light from Vaelun's twin moons was gold or silver. Lyriel found herself caught off guard. No suitor had ever asked her what she loved. They had always asked what she owned. She answered carefully, giving away as little as possible, but she noticed that when she spoke, Cole listened. Not politely, not strategically. He simply listened, the way someone listens when they are genuinely interested in what another person has to say. It bothered her, though she could not quite say why. On the sixth evening, Cole received an encrypted message from Penny Greer, his Terran liaison officer, stationed on a small diplomatic ship in orbit. Penny was sharp, practical, and permanently irritated by the situation. The Council faction led by Ketharon is pushing hard, she told him through the secure channel. They want to cancel the alliance and pivot to the Drashek Dominion. The Drashek are offering military protection in exchange for trade access and basing rights. If the bonding doesn't happen, the treaty falls apart, and the Terran Confederation loses its foothold in this sector. I understand, Cole said. Do you? Penny's voice was tight. Because from where I'm sitting, you're down there being treated like something they scraped off a boot, and you haven't once asked to come home. I made a promise, Penny. A promise to who? Cole paused. To everyone who comes after me. If I quit, the next human who walks into that palace walks in already beaten. There was a long silence on the channel. Then Penny sighed. You're either the bravest man I know, or the dumbest. I haven't decided which. Let me know when you figure it out, Cole said, and closed the channel. That night, in her chambers, Lyriel sat by the window and watched the stars turn slowly outside the station's hall. Sira was tidying the room behind her when she paused and said, I heard Lady Merethi and Lady Savine talking about the human again today. And? They called him the iron-blooded ape. They said the bonding would be like chaining a princess to a farm animal. Lyriel said nothing for a long time. She had heard worse. She had thought worse herself, but something about it sat wrong in her chest tonight. A small, sharp discomfort, like a stone in a shoe. Not because she disagreed with the words, not yet, but because in 6 days of watching Cole Harris be mocked, belittled, tricked and humiliated by the most powerful court in the Valoon Empire, she had not once seen him be cruel. She had not once seen him be petty. She had not once seen him give them a single reason to hate him beyond the simple fact that he was human. And that, she was beginning to realize, said more about her court than it did about him. The announcement came on the morning of the 8th day, delivered by a palace herald, in a voice that rang through every hall and chamber of the orbital station. The rite of ascension, the ancient trial of combat, that every groom must pass before a royal bonding, would take place in 3 days. The bride's house would select the champion. The groom would face him in the arena. It was tradition, it was sacred, and it was, by every measure that mattered, a death sentence. Because Lord Ketharoon sat on the trial selection council, and Lord Ketharoon had chosen General Valeth. The name moved through the court like a cold wind. Valeth was not a ceremonial fighter. He was a war hero, the commander who had broken the Drashek siege at Valoon's third moon 15 years ago. He was 7 feet tall, carved from muscle and scar tissue, and he had killed more enemies in personal combat than most soldiers had seen in their entire careers. The rite of ascension was supposed to be a symbolic test, a gentle thing wrapped in ritual and formality. Putting Valeth in the arena was like putting a warship in a bathtub. Everyone understood what Ketharon was doing. He was daring the human to fight and die, or to withdraw and be humiliated. Either way, the bonding would fail, the treaty would collapse, and Ketharon's faction would be free to pursue the Drashek alliance. Lyriel went to her father that same morning. She found Sovereign Aranthor in his private study, a tall chamber filled with old books and the faint hum of the station's life support systems. Aranthor was old by Valen standards. His silver hair had gone white, and his once sharp features had softened with time. But his eyes were still clear and careful. This is not a trial, Lyriel told him. It is an execution. Valeth will kill him. The selection was made by the council, according to tradition, Aranthor said. His voice was tired. Ketherun controls the council. You know this. I know many things, daughter. I also know that if I overrule the council on a matter of sacred tradition, I lose what little support I have left among the noble houses. The court is watching. If I bend the rules for a human, they will say I have already sold our sovereignty. And if the human dies in your arena, what will the Terran Confederation say then? Oranthor looked at her for a long time. Pray that he is wise enough to withdraw, he said quietly. But Cole Harris was not going to withdraw. Penny Greer told him he should. She appeared on his communication screen that afternoon, her face tight with worry, and laid out the situation in the blunt, practical way she always did. Valeth is a professional killer, Cole. This isn't a test, it's a setup. Grant Holloway says you can withdraw gracefully, and the Confederation will find another path to the treaty. There is no other path, Cole said. If I withdraw, the court sees it as proof that humans are weak. The treaty is dead, and the next human envoy who comes here starts from an even lower position. And if you die, then I die standing up. That's worth something too. Penny stared at him through the screen for a long moment. I really hate you sometimes, she said. I know, Cole said. Keep the channel open during the fight. In case. In case of what? Cole did not answer. The morning of the Rite of Ascension broke cold and bright. The great arena of the orbital palace was a vast oval chamber at the heart of the station, ringed by tiered galleries that rose up like the inside of a bowl. Thousands of Valoon nobles filled the seats, dressed in their finest colors, their voices a low, excited hum. Floating camera drones circled the arena floor, broadcasting the event to every screen on Valoon Prime below. Lyriel sat in the royal gallery beside her father. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was a mask. Inside, something was wound tight. General Valeth entered first. He walked through the great doors at the far end of the arena, in full ceremonial warplate, layered scales of dark metal over a bodysuit of woven energy mesh. In his hands he carried a plasma-edged halberd, a weapon nearly as tall as he was, its blade shimmering with a faint blue heat. He moved like a predator, smooth and unhurried, and when he reached the center of the arena, he planted the halberd and stood like a statue carved from iron. The crowd roared. Then the doors opened again, and Cole Harris walked in. He wore his Terran dress uniform, dark blue, clean, pressed. No armor, no shield, no helmet. The blade hung at his hip in its old leather sheath, and he carried nothing else. He was a full 2 feet shorter than Valeth, and looked, in comparison, like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. The arena went quiet for a single heartbeat, and then the laughter started. It was not loud, it was worse than loud. It was the soft, disbelieving laughter of people watching something absurd, something so far beneath them that it did not even deserve real mockery. Cole walked to the center of the arena and stopped 10 paces from Valeth. He looked up at the general and gave a short nod. Valeth looked down at him with something that might have been pity. The signal sounded. Valeth moved first. He was fast, terrifyingly fast for someone his size. The halberd swept in a low arc that should have taken Cole's legs out from under him. Cole stepped back, barely clearing the blade. The heat from the plasma edge singed the fabric of his trousers. The general pressed forward. He struck high, low, diagonal, each blow precise and powerful, each one fast enough to blur. Cole moved. He ducked, sidestepped, rolled. He did not try to block. He did not try to counter. He just moved, and every movement was tight and clean, with no wasted energy. He was not fighting. He was surviving. He was buying time. The crowd's laughter died within the first minute. What replaced it was silence, the kind of silence that comes when people begin to realize that what they are watching is not what they expected. Valeth struck again and again. He was stronger, faster, longer in reach, and better armed. He was in everything the Valen believed themselves to be, superior in every measurable way. And yet the human would not fall. Every time Valeth committed to a strike, Cole was somewhere else. Every time the halberd swept through the space where his body had been a half-second before, Cole was already moving, already adjusting, already watching. He was learning. The court could see it now, even if they did not want to admit it. The human was reading the general's patterns, the feints, the weight shifts, the micro-expressions before each attack. Cole was cataloging all of it, move by move, and the gaps between his dodges were getting tighter. He was not just surviving anymore. He was closing in. 2 minutes into the fight, Cole drew his blade. The sound of old steel clearing a leather sheath should not have been audible in an arena that size. But the silence was so complete that every person in the galleries heard it. The blade was short, plain, and dull gray. It had no energy edge, no enhancement, no technology. It was just metal, shaped and sharpened by human hands. Valeth swung the halberd in a wide overhead arc, meant to end the fight. Cole stepped inside the arc. He moved under the general's guard so fast that the floating cameras almost lost him. He planted his feet, turned his body, and brought the tip of his blade up to rest against the soft skin of Valeth's throat, just above the collar of his armor. The arena held its breath. Valeth froze. He looked down at the human standing inside his reach, the old steel blade pressed gently against his pulse, and something shifted in his expression. The pity was gone. What replaced it was recognition. "You were never the fool they said you were," Valeth said quietly, so only Cole could hear. Cole held the blade steady for one more heartbeat, then stepped back and sheathed it in a single smooth motion. He bowed to the sovereign's gallery, a correct bow, nothing more, and turned and walked out of the arena without looking back. The silence followed him all the way to the doors, and it stayed long after he was gone. In the royal gallery, Lyriel sat with her hands still folded in her lap, and watched the empty space where the human had stood. Something behind her eyes had shifted, cracked open like a door she had not known was there. She did not have a word for it yet. She only knew that the world looked slightly different now than it had 5 minutes ago, and she was not sure it would ever look the same again. The court had not stopped talking about the fight, and Cole Harris had not stopped bleeding from it. He sat on the edge of his bed in the servants' wing, shirt off, working a Terran field suture kit across a deep cut on his left side. Valeth's halberd had caught him during the second exchange, a grazing blow that had sliced through his uniform and opened a line across his ribs. He had not shown it during the fight. He had not shown it during the walk out of the arena. He had simply gone back to his room, closed the door, and started stitching. The knock came just after he had finished the third suture. He set down the needle, pulled on a loose undershirt that immediately spotted with blood, and opened the door. Lyriel stood in the corridor. She was alone. No Syra, no guards, no attendants. She wore a simple gray robe instead of her usual formal gown, and her silver-white hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked, for the first time since Cole had met her, like a person instead of a princess. "You are hurt," she said, looking at the blood spreading through his shirt. "It's handled," Cole said. "It is not handled. You are stitching yourself with a field kit in a servant's room. You did not ask the palace physicians for help. They're busy. They are not busy. You did not ask because you did not think anyone here would help you." Cole said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Lyriel stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation. She looked around, at the narrow bed, the bare walls, the cold air, the single overhead light, and something tightened in her expression. She had never been to the servants' wing before. She had not known it looked like this. "Sit down," she said. "Let me see it." Lyriel pulled a chair beside him, took the field kit from his hands, and examined the wound with a focus that surprised him. Her fingers were long and careful, and she worked the remaining sutures with a steadiness that spoke of training. Not medical training, but the precise, controlled hand of someone who had been taught to be exact in everything she did. "You fought well today," she said while she worked. She did not look up. "I survived today," Cole said. "That's not the same thing." It looked the same from where I was sitting. She tied off the last suture and pressed a clean bandage over the wound. Then she sat back and looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time. "Tell me about your world," she said. Cole was quiet for a moment, and then he talked. He told her about the frontier, the Terran outer colonies where the air was thin and the soil was red, and the nearest city was 3 days away by ground transport. He told her about growing up in a settlement called Ridgeline, where his mother, Clara Harris, ran a supply outpost that served miners and surveyors and the occasional lost traveler. He told her that his mother was a small woman with rough hands and a voice like gravel, and that she had raised him alone after his father died in a mining accident when Cole was 6. "She used to say something," Cole said. "She used to say that the people who laugh at you are never the ones who matter. The ones who matter are the ones standing next to you when there is nothing left to laugh about." Lyriel listened. She listened the way Cole had listened to her during their supervised hours, not politely, not strategically, but with the quiet attention of someone who wanted to understand. "And the blade?" she asked. Cole glanced down at the sheath resting on the bed beside him. "It was my grandfather's. He carried it during the first Terran expansion wars. Back then, humans were just starting to move out into the galaxy. We didn't have advanced weapons or energy shields. We had steel and stubbornness." He smiled, just slightly. He said a blade was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Lyriel reached out and touched the worn leather of the sheath. She could feel the age in it, the years of hands gripping it, the weight of the stories folded into the material. "I was raised to believe your kind was lesser," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a crack running through it. "It was not just an opinion. It was taught. In our schools, in our histories, in every story we tell our children. Humans are short-lived, fragile, and driven by animal instincts. That is what we are told. That is what I believed." She met his eyes. "I am ashamed of that." "Shame is only useful if it changes something," Cole said. They sat in silence for a while after that. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had finally stopped performing for the walls around them. Far above them, in the gilded chambers of the noble quarter, Lord Ketharun was not sitting in silence. He was pacing. The human's victory in the arena had not just embarrassed him. It had destabilized his entire political position. The trial was supposed to prove human weakness. Instead, it had proven the opposite, and now the moderate nobles on the council were wavering. If the bonding went forward, the Terran alliance would be sealed, and Ketharun's faction would lose its leverage permanently. He could not allow that. He opened a secure channel, not to anyone on the station, but to a relay point 3 systems away, deep in Drashik-controlled space. The face that appeared on the screen was gray-skinned and heavy-jawed, with small dark eyes that held no warmth. "Commander Zal," Ketharun said, "the situation has changed. I need to accelerate the timeline." "You promised us the defense codes," Zal said. His voice was a low rumble. "And you will have them. I am transmitting the orbital grid access sequences now. With these, your fleet can bypass the outer defense ring and reach the station within hours of entering the system. And the Sovereign will be removed, along with the human and anyone else who stands in the way. I will have a new council in place before your ships reach orbit. All I need is time." "You will have 3 days," Zal said. "My fleet is already moving." The channel closed. Ketharun stood in the dark of his chamber, breathing slowly, and told himself that this was necessary, that he was saving his people from a degrading alliance with an inferior species, that history would understand. 2 levels below him, Penny Greer was running a routine scan of local communication traffic when a fragment caught her attention. It was small, just a sliver of an encrypted transmission that had bounced off a relay satellite before disappearing into deep space. She could not read it, but she could trace its destination, Drashek space. She ran the fragment through every decryption tool she had. It took her 6 hours to crack enough of it to read a single line. Fleet inbound, 3 days, orbital codes confirmed. She went cold. Within the hour, she was in a secure room with Cole and Grant Holloway, the Terran ambassador. Grant was a calm, measured man with gray hair and steady hands, and even he looked pale. If the Drashek have the orbital defense codes, the station's shields are useless, Penny said. They will walk right through. How long until the nearest Terran fleet can reach us? Cole asked. Captain Nate Briggs and his carrier group are stationed in the Kellen system. 12 hours at maximum speed. If I send the signal now, they can be here, but not in time to stop the first wave. Grant Holloway leaned forward. We should evacuate. Pull our people out, and let the Valoon handle their own crisis. If we leave now, Cole said, the alliance is over, and the Valoon do not know the attack is coming. Ketharon controls half the military chain of command. By the time they figure out what is happening, it will be too late. He stood up. I need to talk to the Sovereign. Cole went directly to Aranthor's private study. The Sovereign listened in silence as Cole laid out the intelligence. The intercepted fragment, the Drashek fleet, the betrayal from within. When Cole finished, Aranthor sat very still for a very long time. His hands trembled slightly on the arms of his chair. He was an old man, watching his empire crack from the inside. I have no one I can trust, Aranthor said. My own court is compromised. My own nobles have sold my defenses to the enemy. The first explosions hit the outer ring of the orbital station at dawn. The Drashek fleet had moved faster than anyone expected. Their lead ships, heavy cruisers with armored prows built for ramming, punched through the gaps in the defense grid exactly where the stolen codes told them the shields would be weakest. The station shuddered. Alarms tore through every level. The lights flickered once, twice, and then shifted to the deep red of emergency power. In the command center of the orbital palace, chaos was already spreading. Half the senior military officers had been appointed by Ketharon and were either frozen with confusion or actively sabotaging communications. Orders were being issued and countermanded within seconds. The defense fleet was scrambling, but without coordination, their ships were pulling in different directions like a body without a spine. Cole Harris walked into the command center, and the room went quiet. He was not the highest-ranking person there. He was not even Valen. But he moved with a certainty that cut through the panic like a blade through cloth. He crossed to the central command table, studied the tactical display for 10 seconds, and then started talking. Seal the outer docking bays. Pull the defense fleet into a close screen around the station. Do not send them out to meet the Drashek in open space. They will be picked apart. Redirect all shield power to the 3 weakest grid sections, and get me a list of every officer in this room who was appointed by Lord Ketharon. A Valoon colonel, with silver braids on his uniform, stared at Cole and said, "You have no authority here, human." "He has mine," said a voice from the doorway. Sovereign Aranthor stepped into the command center, Lyriel at his side. The old sovereign's face was gray with exhaustion, but his voice was iron. "Cole Harris speaks with the authority of the throne. Any officer who disobeys him will be treated as a collaborator with the enemy. Is that clear?" The room shifted. Not everyone was happy about it, but a direct order from the sovereign was not something even the proudest Valoon officer could ignore. And within minutes, Cole had control of the defense. He divided the battle into 3 fronts: the orbital stations on the station's outer ring, where the Drashek boarding parties were already cutting through airlocks; the planetary shield generators on the lower levels, which were the only thing protecting Valun Prime from orbital bombardment. And the palace itself, where Ketharin's loyalists were still embedded like thorns. For the outer ring, he assigned General Valith. The general had come to the command center in full armor, his halberd strapped to his back, and he had stood in the corner, watching Cole with quiet intensity. When Cole gave him the assignment, Valith nodded once and said, "I will hold the ring." He paused, then added, "I underestimated you once. I will not do so again." Then he left, and within the hour, the Droshek boarding parties on the outer ring found themselves facing a Valun war hero who was very, very angry. For the palace, Cole assigned Lyriel. She had not asked for a combat role, and Cole did not give her one. Instead, he asked her to do something harder, to move through the palace, identify Ketharin's remaining loyalists, and rally the undecided nobles and guards to the defense. Her face, her voice, her presence meant something that no military order could match. "You do not need a weapon for this," Cole told her. "You need them to see you standing. That is enough." Lyriel met his eyes. "And where will you be?" "The shield generators. If they fall, nothing else matters." For the shield generators, Cole took a force of 40 palace guards, a handful of loyal Valun soldiers, and a small Terran Marine detachment of 12 men and women who had been stationed on the diplomatic ship. The Marines were led by a young sergeant named Danny Voss, 24 years old, freckled, built like a compact engine, with a voice that could carry across a battlefield. "Sergeant," Cole said as they moved through the lower corridors toward the generator complex, "have your people ever held a fixed position against a superior force?" It was the kind of grin that had no business being on a face headed into a fight it probably would not survive. "Sir, we're Terran Marines. That is kind of our whole thing." Penny Greer, still on the diplomatic ship in orbit, had already sent the distress signal to Captain Nate Briggs. Briggs had confirmed. His carrier group was burning hard toward the Valun system, but they were 12 hours out. 12 hours was a lifetime in a battle. Penny told Cole this over the communication channel, her voice flat and professional, and barely hiding the fear underneath. 12 hours, Cole repeated. He looked at the soldiers and Marines around him, tired, scared, a mix of two species who had been taught to despise each other. "We do not need to win," he told them. "We just need to hold." The Droshek hit the shield generators 2 hours later. They came through the lower maintenance corridors in waves, gray-skinned, heavy, armored in dark plates, carrying pulse rifles and vibroblades. They were not subtle. They did not need to be. They had numbers, and they knew that if the generators fell, the planet below was theirs. Cole's force met them at a choke point, a long corridor with heavy blast doors on either side, the only direct path to the generator core. The first wave came fast and hard, and the fighting was close, loud, and brutal. Pulse fire lit up the corridor in flashes of blue and white. The Valun guards fought with discipline. The Terran Marines fought with a ferocity that startled everyone around them. Danny Voss held the left side of the corridor with 4 Marines. A Droshek soldier twice his size charged him, and Danny put him down with 2 shots and a headbutt that cracked the alien's faceplate. He looked up, blood running from his forehead, and shouted, "Next!" Above them, in the palace halls, Lyriel moved through the chaos with a calm that surprised even herself. She found Lord Ketharin in the throne room, surrounded by a dozen of his personal guards. He had been trying to reach the sovereign's chambers when she stepped through the door and blocked his path. Ketharin looked at her with something between pity and contempt. "Step aside, princess. This is not your fight. The Droshek will be here within hours, and when they arrive, I will be the one sitting on your father's throne. You can still have a place in the new order, if you are wise." "A place," Lyriel repeated, "beside a traitor who sold his own people's defenses to an enemy fleet. I saved our people from a degrading alliance with animals, Ketharon snarled. That human you are so fond of, the ape's bride they call you, did you know that? He is bleeding out in a corridor right now, dying for a species that is not his own. And for what? For honor? For a promise? Humans are fools, Lyriel. Brave, stupid fools. Lyriel crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, and struck him across the face with the back of her hand. The sound rang off the throne room walls. Ketharon staggered, more from shock than pain, and stared at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. Cole Harris has more honor in his scarred hands than your entire bloodline, she said. Her voice did not shake. Guards, take him. The loyalist guards around Ketharon hesitated. They looked at the princess, standing alone in the center of the throne room, unarmed, unarmored, and completely unafraid. And one by one, they lowered their weapons. In the corridor below, the fight for the shield generators was reaching its breaking point. Cole's force had held for 6 hours, but they were running low on ammunition, low on energy, and low on bodies. The draw set kept coming. The blast doors were scorched and dented. 3 of Danny's Marines were down. A dozen Valen guards had fallen. Cole drew his blade. It was absurd. A sword against pulse rifles and armored soldiers. But something about the sight of it, the old steel, the worn leather hilt, the human standing at the center of the corridor with nothing between him and the enemy, but a piece of metal forged by his grandfather's hands, did something to the defenders around him. Danny Voss saw it first. He checked his rifle, slapped a fresh charge into it, and stepped up beside Cole. If you're staying, I'm staying. The other Marines formed up, and then, one by one, the Valen soldiers stepped forward too. They looked at the human holding his ground, with a blade that had no right to be on a battlefield. And something shifted in them. Something old and deep. Something that had nothing to do with species or politics or the length of a lifespan. It was the simple, ancient recognition of courage. They held the line. For 6 more hours, through 3 more waves, through fire and blood and the screaming of alarms, they held. When Captain Nate Briggs's carrier group dropped out of hyperspace above Valen Prime and tore into the Drashek fleet's exposed flank with everything they had, the enemy broke. Their ships scattered, then turned, then ran. The battle was over. In the aftermath, the orbital station was quiet, in the way that places are quiet after great violence. A heavy, exhausted silence, filled with smoke, and the distant sound of medical teams moving through the corridors. Sovereign Aranthor addressed the court in the Great Hall, which was cracked and scorched, but still standing. Lord Ketharon was led away in restraints. The alliance with the Terran Confederation was reaffirmed, not as a political arrangement, but as a bond sealed in shared blood. Aranthor turned to Cole, who stood at the front of the hall with his uniform torn and his blade still at his hip, and said, "I was told humans were fragile, brief, and unremarkable. I see now that I was told wrong." The bonding ceremony took place 3 days later, at sunset over Valen Prime. The light from the twin moons, Lyriel had once told him it was silver, not gold, poured through the great windows of the ceremonial chamber and turned everything soft and pale. The court was there, all of them, and not one of them laughed, not one of them whispered. The silence was not the silence of contempt. It was the silence of people who had watched a man earn something the hard way, and knew better than to cheapen it with noise. Lyriel took Cole's hand. Her fingers were long and cool against his rough, scarred ones. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and what passed between them was not a transaction or a treaty or a symbol. It was a choice. She had chosen him, not because a document compelled her, but because she had seen what he was, and it was enough. Cole's blade rested at his hip, its engraving catching the fading light. for those who stand when others kneel. And across the galaxy, in embassies and outposts and frontier settlements and the quiet rooms where soldiers sat and shared stories over bad coffee, the tale of the human who walked into a court of gods with nothing but a plain uniform and an old sword, who endured their laughter without breaking, who bled for people who despised him, and who reminded an ancient civilization of something they had forgotten. That courage is not measured in centuries. It is measured in the moments when it would be easier to kneel and you choose to stand.